My name is Jake Thompson, and I never expected to fall in love with my cousin. Growing up in a traditional New England family, I always felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It wasn't until Caleb came to live with us during our senior year of high school that everything changed. I was 17 when Aunt Sarah passed away unexpectedly, leaving Caleb without a parent. My parents, being the closest relatives, immediately offered to take him in. I remember the day he arrived, tall, lean, with dark curls and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of sadness. Despite being cousins, we hadn't spent much time together growing up due to the distance between our families. "Jake, help Caleb get settled in the guest room," my mother said, her hand resting protectively on Caleb's shoulder. I nodded, grabbing one of his bags and leading him upstairs. The guest room was across from mine, a fact that would later prove both a blessing and a torment. As I helped him unpack, I noticed how carefully he handled his mother's framed photo, placing it on the nightstand with trembling hands. "I'm sorry about Aunt Sarah," I said softly. Caleb looked up, his green eyes meeting mine. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It still doesn't feel real. You know?" Without thinking, I reached out and squeezed his shoulder. The moment my hand made contact, I felt something, a spark, a connection, something indefinable but undeniably present. Caleb didn't pull away. Instead, he placed his hand over mine for a brief moment. That first week was a delicate dance of getting to know each other. Caleb was quiet, understandably withdrawn, but I found myself drawn to him in a way I'd never experienced before. We shared classes at school, and I introduced him to my friends, watching as he slowly began to emerge from his shell. It was during our shared free period in the library that I first noticed how much I enjoyed just being near him. We'd taken to studying together, sharing a table in the back corner. Caleb had a way of chewing on his lower lip when he concentrated, and I caught myself staring more than once. "You're good at this," he said one day, looking over my chemistry notes. "Way better than I am." I shrugged, trying to ignore how his praise made my chest warm. "I could help you study if you want. We could use my room, it's quieter than the library." That's how our evening study sessions began. We'd sit on my bed, books spread around us, shoulders touching as we went over problems together. Sometimes, when Caleb would lean over to look at my textbook, his curls would brush against my cheek, and I'd forget how to breathe. One night, about a month after he'd moved in, I found him sitting on the back porch after everyone else had gone to bed. The October air was crisp, and he was wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head. "Mom and I used to stargaze together. She knew all the constellations, would tell me stories about each one." Without hesitation, I moved closer, sharing his blanket. "Tell me one of the stories." Caleb shifted closer, his warmth seeping into my side as he pointed to the sky. "See those stars there? That's Orion. Mom used to say he was the most beautiful hunter in all of Greek mythology. The gods put him in the stars so his beauty would last forever." His voice caught slightly on the word, beautiful, and I turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his profile was sharp and clear, and I could see tears glistening in his eyes. Without thinking, I reached up and wiped one away as it fell. The moment my fingers touched his cheek, time seemed to stop. Caleb turned to face me, our faces inches apart. I could feel his breath warm against my lips, and my heart was thundering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Jake," he whispered my name, sounding different somehow. Before either of us could move, a light flicked on inside the house, breaking the spell. We jumped apart, and Caleb quickly stood up. "We should get some sleep," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Thanks for listening." That night, I lay awake in my bed, replaying the moment over and over. What had almost happened? What did I want to happen? The fact that Caleb was my cousin should have bothered me more than it did. But all I could think about was how right it felt to be close to him. The next few days were awkward. We still studied together, but Caleb kept a careful distance between us. I caught him watching me sometimes, though he'd quickly look away when I noticed. The tension was unbearable, but neither of us seemed brave enough to address it. Everything changed during a rainy Saturday afternoon. Our parents were at a charity event, leaving us alone in the house. I was in my room, attempting to focus on homework, when thunder crashed outside. Moments later, my door opened, and Caleb stood there looking uncertain. The power went out in my room, He said, "Come in," I said, moving over to make space on my bed. He sat down closer than necessary, and I could feel the slight tremor in his body. Quote, "Jake, about the other night," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his curls in frustration. "We don't have to talk about it," I offered. "But I want to," he said, suddenly turning to face me. "I can't stop thinking about it, about you. And I know it's wrong. I know we're cousins. But," I cut him off by pressing my finger to his lips. "Don't say it's wrong. Not yet. Just tell me what you're feeling." His eyes met mine, and I saw my own confusion, desire, and fear reflected there. Slowly, deliberately, he took my hand from his lips but didn't let it go. Instead, he intertwined our fingers. "I feel like I'm drowning every time you're near me," he confessed. "Like I can't breathe properly unless you're touching me. And I know I should feel guilty about these feelings. But the only thing that feels wrong is pretending they don't exist." The rain pattered against the window, creating a cocoon of sound around us. In that moment, the rest of the world felt very far away. I reached up with my free hand and traced his jaw with my fingers, feeling the slight stubble there. "I feel it too," I whispered. "Every time you're close, every time you smile, every time you say my name. I've never felt anything like this before." Caleb leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed. "We can't go back from this," he murmured. Instead of answering, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, but when Caleb responded, threading his fingers through my hair, it deepened into something more urgent. His lips were soft but demanding, and I could taste the mint from his afternoon tea. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Caleb rested his forehead against mine. "We're crazy," he whispered, but he was smiling. "Probably," I agreed, running my thumb across his lower lip. "But I don't care." That afternoon marked the beginning of our secret relationship. We had to be careful, of course. Around our parents and at school, we maintained the appearance of close cousins who had bonded through tragedy. But in private moments, stolen kisses in empty classrooms, lingering touches during movie nights, whispered conversations in the dark, we allowed ourselves to be more. Our study sessions became opportunities for exploration. One evening, as I was explaining a calculus problem, Caleb interrupted me by trailing kisses down my neck. "I'm trying to teach you derivatives," I protested weakly, though I was already tilting my head to give him better access. "I'm deriving much more pleasure from this," he murmured against my skin, making me laugh at the terrible pun before capturing my lips with his. We developed a system of subtle signals and excuses to create private moments. A certain way of touching the back of our neck meant, "I need to talk to you alone." Homework became our most frequent alibi. No one questioned why two high school seniors needed to study so much. But it wasn't all secret kisses and hidden touches. We talked for hours about everything: our fears, our dreams, our guilt. Caleb opened up about his mother, sharing memories that made us both laugh and cry. I told him about my struggles with accepting my sexuality, how I tried to date girls but never felt anything real. "When did you know?" he asked one night as we lay on my bed, his head on my chest. "That you were gay?" I ran my fingers through his curls. "Considering, I think I always knew. But I didn't want to admit it. When you came here, you made it impossible to deny anymore." "What about you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I had a crush on my best friend back home when I was 15. Nothing ever happened, but it scared me enough that I started dating girls to prove something to myself. Then Mom got sick, and everything else seemed unimportant, until you. The guilt was harder to deal with. Not just because we were cousins, but because sometimes it felt like we were dishonoring Aunt Sarah's memory. Caleb especially struggled with this. "She would hate me," he said during one particularly difficult night, "if she knew what I was doing, who I'd become." I pulled him closer, kissing his temple. "Your mom loved you more than anything in the world. That kind of love doesn't come with conditions." We had close calls. Once, my mother almost walked in on us kissing in the kitchen. We managed to spring apart just in time, but her suspicious look lingered. Another time, one of our classmates commented on how close we seemed. "You guys are more like brothers than cousins," she said, making both of us tense up. "We've just gotten close since he moved in," I explained carefully, avoiding Caleb's eyes. As winter approached, keeping our relationship hidden became increasingly challenging. The cold weather meant more time indoors, more family activities, and fewer opportunities to be alone. But it also meant the winter formal was coming up, and with it came unexpected complications. "Are you going to ask someone?" Caleb questioned one evening as we lay on his bed, supposedly working on our English essays. His tone was casual, but I could hear the underlying tension. "I wasn't planning to," I replied, reaching for his hand, "unless you want me to." He intertwined our fingers, staring at our joined hands. "Lisa Mitchell asked me today." I didn't know what to say, so I told her I'd think about it. My stomach clenched at the thought of Caleb going to the dance with someone else. Even if it was just for show, maybe we should both go with dates, I suggested reluctantly. It might look suspicious if neither of us goes. Caleb sat up abruptly, pulling his hand away. "I hate this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I hate pretending. I hate watching girls flirt with you in class. I hate not being able to touch you when I want to. Sometimes I think." "What?" I prompted when he fell silent. "Sometimes I think we should just leave after graduation. Go somewhere where nobody knows we're cousins. We could start fresh, be together openly." The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Where would we go? California, maybe? Or New York? Somewhere big enough to get lost in. He turned to face me, his eyes intense. "Would you consider it?" Instead of answering, I pulled him down into a kiss. It was different from our usual careful kisses. This one was desperate, hungry, full of unspoken promises. Caleb responded with equal fervor, pressing me back against his pillows. His hands slipped under my shirt, and I gasped at the contact. We'd been careful about physical intimacy, both aware that crossing certain lines would make everything more complicated. But in that moment, with the winter sun setting outside and the house quiet around us, complications didn't seem to matter. "We should stop," Caleb whispered against my lips, even as his fingers traced patterns on my skin. "Should we?" I challenged, arching into his touch. The sound of a car door slamming outside made us freeze, footsteps on the porch, keys in the lock. My parents were home early. We scrambled apart, straightening our clothes and grabbing our abandoned textbooks just as my mother's voice called up the stairs. "Boys, we brought dinner." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I snuck across the hall to Caleb's room. He was sitting by the window, moonlight painting his features in silver. Without a word, he opened his arms, and I went to him. "I'll go anywhere with you," I whispered into his neck. "After graduation, we'll figure it out together." He held me tighter, and I could feel his smile against my hair. "Promise?" "Promise." The next few weeks were a blur of secret planning and careful pretense. We both ended up going to the winter formal, me with Sarah Johnson, a quiet girl from my chemistry class, and Caleb with Lisa. We made sure to dance with our dates, smile for photos, play our parts perfectly, but our eyes kept finding each other across the decorated gym. And during one slow song, we managed to position ourselves close enough that our hands could brush as we danced with our respective partners. As spring semester began, our plans started taking more concrete shape. Late at night, we'd research cities, universities, and apartments, dreaming of a future where we could be together openly. Caleb had inherited some money from his mother, and I had my college fund. It wasn't a fortune, but it would be enough to start somewhere new. "NYU has a good film program," Caleb said one night, showing me the website on his laptop. "And you could study literature there. We could get a small apartment in Brooklyn." I loved seeing him like this, animated, hopeful, planning our future. It made the daily pretense easier to bear. But reality had a way of interrupting our dreams. One afternoon in March, my mother caught me looking at apartments in New York. "New York?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. "I thought you were planning to attend State University with your father's legacy scholarship." "I'm just exploring options," I said quickly, closing the browser. "Nothing's decided yet." She sat down beside me, her expression concerned. "Honey, is everything okay? You've seemed different lately, more distant." My heart raced. "Everything's fine, Mom, just thinking about the future." "And Caleb?" she asked carefully. "Is he planning to go to New York too?" Something in her tone made me look up sharply. Her eyes were studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "We haven't really discussed it," I lied, standing up. "I should start dinner prep." That evening, I told Caleb about the conversation. We were in his car, parked in our secret spot by the lake. It had become our sanctuary, the one place we could be ourselves without fear of discovery. She suspects something, I said, watching his profile in the gathering dusk. The way she asked about you. Caleb took my hand, bringing it to his lips. Maybe it's time to tell them after graduation. Before we leave, the thought made my stomach churn. They'll never understand. They'll try to stop us. They can't stop us, he said firmly. We're both 18, but they're our family. Jake, don't they deserve to know the truth? I turned to face him fully. And what if they call the police? What if they try to separate us? Then we'll leave sooner, he said simply. I'm not giving you up. Not for anyone. The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. I leaned across the console and kissed him, trying to pour all my feelings into it. He responded immediately, pulling me closer, his hands tangling in my hair. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent. Without breaking contact, I managed to climb over into his lap. Straddling him, his hands slipped under my shirt, and I gasped at the feeling of his cold fingers on my warm skin. We should go somewhere more private, he murmured against my lips. My parents are at their charity dinner. I reminded him. The house is empty. The drive home was torture. Both of us hyper-aware of each other. As soon as we were inside, Caleb pushed me against the wall, his lips finding mine again. We stumbled upstairs to my room, shedding clothes along the way. That night was our first time together, and it was both awkward and perfect. We took our time exploring each other, learning what made the other gasp and moan. Afterward, lying tangled in my sheets, I traced patterns on his chest while he played with my hair. I love you, he whispered into the darkness. It wasn't the first time we'd said it, but it felt different now, heavier with promise. I love you too, I replied, pressing a kiss to his heart. Always. The weeks leading up to graduation became increasingly tense. After our first night together, it was harder to maintain the careful distance we'd established. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, carried the weight of our secret desires. We started taking more risks, stealing moments whenever we could. One afternoon, we were studying in the school library when Caleb passed me a note. Storage room. 5 minutes. My heart raced as I watched him get up and casually walk away. I counted to 300 in my head before following. The storage room was dim and dusty, filled with old textbooks and supplies. Caleb pulled me into his arms as soon as I closed the door. I've been wanting to kiss you all day, he murmured against my lips. We were so lost in each other that we didn't hear the footsteps outside until it was almost too late. We sprang apart just as the door handle turned, and our English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, stepped in. Boys, she said, looking surprised. What are you doing in here? Looking for extra notebooks, Caleb said quickly. For graduation notes. She looked skeptical but nodded. The supply cabinet is in the main office. This room is off limits to students. That close call shook us both. We need to be more careful, I said later that night as we lay in Caleb's bed. My parents were at a dinner party, giving us a rare opportunity to be together. Only for a few more weeks, he reminded me, trailing kisses down my neck. Then we'll be free. We'd been accepted to NYU and found a small apartment in Brooklyn that we could afford. Everything was falling into place. But as graduation drew closer, I noticed my mother watching us more closely. She started finding reasons to keep us separate, sending Caleb on errands, asking me to help with projects, inviting relatives over more frequently. One evening, about 2 weeks before graduation, I overheard her on the phone with my father. Something's not right about their relationship, she was saying. The way they look at each other. I'm worried, John. My blood ran cold. That night, I snuck into Caleb's room after everyone was asleep. We need to move up our timeline, I whispered, telling him what I'd overheard. He pulled me close, his warmth comforting in the darkness. We could leave now, he suggested. We have enough money. We don't have to wait for graduation. I thought about it, just disappearing in the night, leaving everything behind, but something held me back. Let's wait, I decided. Graduate first, then leave, but we need to be extra careful until then. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. We barely touched, barely looked at each other. Every family dinner felt like walking through a minefield. Every conversation carefully measured, but late at night, we'd text each other from our rooms, planning our escape, sharing our dreams and fears. The night before graduation, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a text from Caleb. Meet me on the roof. Our house had a flat section of roof outside my bedroom window that we'd often sat on during warmer nights. I climbed out carefully, finding Caleb already there, looking up at the stars. "Remember that first night we stargazed together?" he asked as I sat beside him. "How could I forget? I wanted to kiss you so badly." He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Tomorrow, everything changes." Quote, "Are you scared?" "Terrified," I admitted, leaning into him, "but more scared of not being with you." He wrapped his arm around me, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Everything was packed and ready. 2 duffel bags hidden in the back of Caleb's closet. Bus tickets to New York purchased under fake names. Our new apartment's deposit paid. After tomorrow's graduation ceremony, while everyone was at the celebration party, we would slip away. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches, cheers, and camera flashes. I barely registered receiving my diploma, too aware of Caleb sitting just a few rows behind me. When his name was called, I watched him cross the stage, my heart swelling with pride and love. During the family photos afterward, my mother insisted on getting shots of Caleb and me together. "The graduating cousins," she said as we posed. Caleb's hand brushed mine, and I had to fight to keep my expression neutral. The celebration party was at our house. While everyone was setting up in the backyard, Caleb and I made our excuses to go change. We met in his room where our bags were hidden. "Ready?" he whispered, taking my hand. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. We jumped apart as my mother entered, closing the door behind her. "Sit down, boys," she said quietly. "We need to talk." My heart stopped. She knew. Somehow, she knew. Caleb and I sat on his bed, not touching, as she pulled up his desk chair. "I've been watching you two for months," she began. "At first, I thought I was imagining things. Then I found this." She held up a piece of paper, "Our bus tickets to New York." "Mom," I started, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. What you two have, it's complicated. And yes, it's unconventional. But I've seen how you look at each other, how you care for each other. I can't pretend to understand it fully, but I know love when I see it." Caleb was gripping the bedspread so tightly his knuckles were white. "Are you going to tell everyone?" he asked. She sighed. "No, but running away isn't the answer. You're both 18, both adults. If you want to go to New York, go, but do it properly. Let us help you move. Let us be part of your lives." I felt tears running down my face. "You're not disgusted? Angry?" "Oh, honey." She moved to sit between us, taking both our hands. "I'm your mother. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy. And Caleb," she turned to him, "Sarah would have wanted the same for you." Caleb broke down then, and my mother pulled him into her arms, reaching for me with her other hand. We sat there for a long time, crying and talking. She asked about our plans, offered advice, and, most importantly, promised to help us tell my father when we were ready. That night, after the party had wound down and everyone had gone home, Caleb and I sat on our roof again. The future still felt uncertain, but somehow, "I can't believe she knows," Caleb said, playing with my fingers. "And she's okay with it." "Maybe not completely okay," I corrected, "but she's trying to understand. That's more than we hoped for." He turned to me, his eyes serious. "Do you still want to go to New York?" "Yes," I said without hesitation, "but not running away. Let's do it right." He smiled, pulling me closer. "I love you," he whispered against my lips. "I love you too," I replied, kissing him under the same stars where our story had begun. 2 months later, we moved to New York, with both our families helping us settle into our small Brooklyn apartment. It wasn't easy. There were still relatives who didn't know, friends we couldn't tell, and challenges we had to face. But we faced them together, no longer hiding in shadows but stepping into the light of our own truth. Sometimes love finds us in unexpected places, with unexpected people. Sometimes it breaks rules and crosses boundaries. But real love, pure love, has a way of making its own path. Caleb and I found ours that summer night under the stars. And despite everything, we wouldn't change a thing.